We are here with Meredith and Tory Taylor with the National Bighorn Sheep Center at Legacy Society, interviewing them about their lives and values in conservation. Thank you for inviting us into your home, and thank you for donating.
Well, thank you, Garrett, and thank you, Sarah, for being here. We'd love to share our stories and our home with people in this wonderful valley. And
Like-minded
I can't
people.
wait to visit with you about our thoughts and our history.
Um, Sarah Bridge, Executive Director of the National Bighorn Sheep Center, and Tory and Meredith, you were some of the first people that I met when I joined the Sheep Center. Your support, your lifetime dedicated to conservation, inspired me, and I can look to you two as mentors. Question for you
Thank
is, what does the Sheep Center mean to you? And what made you inspired to join our Legacy Society?
Well, I was on the original steering committee for organizing the Sheep Center, and I just said, yes, this is the perfect thing for Du Bois. I mean, Bighorn sheep are us, right? And so when they said that the money had come forward through the town to build the Sheep Center, I said, oh my goodness, this is the best of all worlds. And so that's how I got on that steering committee and had some input and some ideas, and we shared ideas. We had a great, what would later become a board, and a group of people, and they were all very civic minded and supportive of restoration of the bighorn sheep and just having a center there for education and for promotion and support of the bighorn sheep. So all of that just fit. Yes.
And for myself, unlike Meredith, I've been involved with the Sheep Center since day one, even before. I helped raise a little bit of money for the construction of it back in the day. And to me, it was I love bighorn sheep. I love all wildlife, but at that time, I was really particular in the bighorn sheep, and this was just such a wonderful thing to support. Was a facility that would really highlight the wonderful wildlife resources, and especially the bighorn sheep resource that we had in the valley at the time.
That's a key point at the time. So for those that aren't familiar, Du Bois, right outside of Du Bois, the Whiskey Mountain herd was once the largest wintering herd of Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep, between 2,000 to 2,500 sheep in that herd.
Correct.
Well, and Garrett and I will get a little bit into how both of you arrived in the valley. But a question, Meredith, that comes up right now is, what was it like to see that many sheep when you came, when you stumbled into town?
Well, and of course, that's why I came here.
Mm-hmm.
I was told by a friend who I met on the Pacific Crest Trail as I was hiking it in 1975. You ought to go to Du Bois, Wyoming if you want to do wildlife research. And I said, what's there? And he says, the largest herd of bighorn sheep in North America. And I said, really? And what do you think? I went to my next re-ration site, which was just right along the whole Pacific Crest Trail. When you came into a town, you would go to the post office and pick up your next re-ration. And I said, I'm going to go look at the library. That's what people did in those days. There wasn't any computer. And I did the periodical index to see who might be interested in funding a research project for me.
Mm-hmm.
I'd never written a grant in my life. And I said, I can do this. And so, what do you think? I did. I sent it off to the National Audubon Society. As opposed to all the others, I did several other applications, but that was the one that responded. And what do you think was the reason? They had the conservation camp at the time. We used to call it the Audubon camp when I first arrived there. And so getting there and seeing all these bighorn sheep, and of course that was September, so I didn't see the wintering herds like you would, but I did once I got up there into the high country to do the bighorn sheep study. And boy, when I heard that I was granted that research project, I was beside myself. I just said, oh my goodness, I've fallen right into it. And I went up there and there they were. And then that winter, I was right there in the middle of hundreds of them around the conservation camp at this time of year. Right. And so, yes, I really was blown away by the fact that the sheep were as healthy, I think. And that's what my study was about, was that I did this based on Valerius Geist, bighorn sheep analysis, that he's from Calgary, Alberta. And so I read all of his work, and I actually later met him. He came to Whiskey Mountain.
Did he?
Yes. And it was like everything fell into place. There were a lot of sheep, but then it turned out that their behavior, which is what Val Geist did with his research, showed that the sheep weren't exactly healthy. They were active, and there were lots of them, but they weren't what I found out later was a healthy herd, which I was really surprised at, because see, that was 75 and it was 92 that the die-off happened.
Interesting.
And so I didn't even see that coming when they had that big die-off. And so it was just an amazing sight to see that many bighorn sheep. And then from Trail Lake, when I was living there at the conservation camp, what we call the conservation camp now, at Milt and Mary White's place, then we would see literally hundreds of elk migrate across the valley at a time. Say, like at this time of year, that storm that happened, that would have driven them from Whiskey to Arrow. And they just trucking right along. And we'd see the same thing with bighorn sheep. We'd see them moving just like migration routes are supposed to do. And I was just so impressed that here was all this wildlife that was free roaming, seemingly healthy, and that I was living there to witness it.
I might add that you might say that the bighorn sheep herd was the conduit that brought Meredith and I together 50 years ago. How cool is that, huh? And that's why we also have always been involved, very supportive, why we wanted to become a legacy member, because we've always been interested in sheep, interested in center, and we want to support it. And our membership in the legacy society is very important, and we can carry all of this forward. I guess we've got a little bit of history with the bighorn sheep.
Right. Well, guess who was one of the first people I met? We were the only two people living in the valley with all these thousands of bighorn sheep and elk, and he was down at Trail Lake Ranch. No, I was at Trail Lake Ranch. He was at Ring Lake Ranch, excuse me. And the only two people in the whole valley. And I had just arrived, and he had just arrived, because he was working at CM before that. And I said, thank you.
Well, how lovely to hear that your relationship, your marriage started with bighorn sheep.
That's absolutely true.
Yes.
Yes. We had a mutual admiration society between us and between the bighorn sheep. And of course, he was outfitting, working for an outfitter at first, and then we were outfitting after that. And he led bighorn sheep hunts, and I went along and everything, but I said, I can't ever shoot one, of course. Right? And of course, when I arrived, this is true confessions. I was a vegetarian. And I invited him over for dinner, and he had the best pumpkin soup he'd ever had in his life.
The only pumpkin soup I've ever had. But I gave her some elk roast and some potatoes, so meat and potatoes that won her over. So. One thing I wanted to add too is I came to this valley. I didn't know why it drew me here. I think it was kind of in the stars why I showed up here. But the wildlands and the wildlife is what appealed to me, still appeals to me. But sheep really got into my blood early on. The first time I ever drove up what we call the Three Lakes today, but up to Tory Valley, the first time I ever drove up there, and by the way, at that time the road was very rough. It's been improved a lot. When Meredith and I were living up there, we were pretty much the only people that ever were in that valley, because the road was so
in the winter. Yeah.
difficult to drive. But the first time, even before I met Meredith, first time I ever drove up there, I got up right to Beck's Bridge, right where that area is, and I turned that little corner right there, and there was a group of mature rams that ran across the road, and I don't know if you recall, but right there's a little rocky mound of stones, of a little outcropping right there, and this group of rams ran up there, and they got up there and they posed right and left, turned their heads for me and turning around, and I was just behind the steering wheel of my vehicle, just mesmerized by the beauty of these animals. And they were really showing off, and they really captured my heart on that particular moment. That was a long time ago.
There is something to say about the regal aspect of sheep.
Oh.
I mean, in the Wind River Valley, especially during the winter months, the 67,000 acres of the Spence Moriarty management area, you can watch wildlife, but sheep in particular are captivating.
They're majestic.
There's
That's
something
what I
about
like to just think about them. You're right, they're regal. And I just look at them and I say, how can anything be so beautiful? How can it? I mean, all wildlife is beautiful, but just the way they hold their horns, both ewes and rams, you just think, you are beautiful. I mean, they are majestic. There's no question about it. Yeah. We're very lucky to live here, and we can't lose this resource. Yeah.
Absolutely. So regarding resource conservation and ethics, you've mentioned before you and your grandfather shared a good connection when you were young.
Right.
So how did if you don't mind sharing, how did your grandfather help you develop your love for conservation and your ethics?
This is my grandfather and me at a few years ago. About 70. And I was the first grandchild. And we bonded.
Yeah.
I didn't even realize how much we bonded right off the bat. And I was the little tomboy. And because my parents they had 3 girls. And being the first one, then whenever we went up to see Pop, and he lived in Maine and we lived in Massachusetts, that we would go up every year and sometimes twice a year. And he and I were like this. And it was just meant to be because he was my favorite grandfather, my only grandfather really, and we just did everything together. So he would take me out fly fishing and boating, because he had a kind of a dinghy, as opposed to, we use canoes now. And he called me Mary. And Mary, we're going up to the mountains now. Let's go up to Mount Katahdin. And he had that heavy Maine accent. It was wonderful. And he just always treated me as his favorite. And I could tell. And I wasn't even comparing to other kids because the kids weren't born yet. But they were, even when they came on, they got to do everything together. But they weren't tomboys like I was. And so he really liked that. And so we were definitely kindred spirits. And he cultivated that conservation ethic in me that I honored. Even right then, I didn't know what the alternative was, but I just said, yeah, this is what we should do for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's terrific. That's terrific.
We should all be so lucky to have a mentor of a grandparent or a parent that teaches us to love life for that way. Life as in the greater world life.
Yeah, people are super lucky. My grandfather shaped much of who I am, and it's young generations are fortunate to have older generations who care and want to spend the time and share those ethics. And
Yes.
develop that connection with.
Then you were lucky too.
Yes.
Yes.
Hopefully we're going to make more people lucky. Hopefully.
I hope so too.
I never
and he
met-
would have loved Tory.
I never met Meredith's grandfather, but I know from the stories Meredith tells me, he and I would have been like this. We would have hit it off.
Yeah.
And it was my misfortune. I never got to meet him. My story, my background along those lines is I was raised in an outdoor family. I feel like they really didn't deliberately instill in me a love of nature and the outdoors and hunting and wildlife, but I think they just put me in settings to where I think I've gradually, ever since childhood, just kind of steadily increased my commitment and my dedication and my interest in the natural world out here. And so it still might be growing to a degree. I've always had that, and I don't know that it was deliberately cultivated, or maybe it's in our genes and our DNA. Or all of the above, maybe both. But I just feel like just being out is a great experience that we can learn from. Young people can learn from just looking at nature. Books are wonderful. I love books, but Mother Nature wrote a great book, and all we have to do is go out there and read it and turn the pages and listen to a sunrise, and you'll learn a lot about the world, the universe, nature, how it's all connected, what we, what our part of it is, and what we can do to help usher that along and keep cultivating that conservation ethic that hopefully will keep a lot of these wildlife and a lot of wildlands abundant like they are or have been.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So, regarding educating children, Meredith, you are an ethnobotanist. For those who don't know, what is ethnobotany and what developed your interest in ethnobotany specifically? Why not something else?
Well, that's being very generous to call me an ethnobotanist because that's not my degree or education. It's my love.
Yeah.
And it's actually very recent in the last few years. I've always been fond of plants, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And I attribute that, whereas my grandfather had this impact on me, my mother and my grandmother, her mother, taught me all the different things about plants, their love of, respect of, and how to. And we had gardens. They didn't do ethnobotany, but they did definitely cultivated plants, vegetables and flowers. And then I realized over the years of going in the Peace Corps and outfitting, going into just outside, you know, wherever you go, there they are, the plants, right? And so I said, I wonder what this is good for. And what do you think? It was good for something.
Yeah, yeah.
There's very little that's poisonous out there. And so then I learned more and more about it, and I said, wow, this is just really valuable for life, just to learn the wild edible and medicinal plants. And of course, we found so many artifacts, archaeology-wise, while we were outfitting, that we brought archaeologists in from the state and from the UW. And then we started thinking like native people. And so one time I surprised all these archaeologists. They were camped up on Whiskey Mountain with us at High Rise Village, we had called it. And I said, you know what? We ought to make a Native American meal of just the things that people would have eaten. Well, how do you know what that was? I said, look around you. That's what they ate.
Yeah.
That's what they had, right?
Yeah.
And so we did bring some meat in because it was summertime, so there was no hunting going on. But we roasted those. We essentially had carne asada, meat over the grill. But then we had forbs for salad, like Indian paintbrush, bluebells, columbine, all the beautiful red, white, and blue salad. And then the biscuit root we would make into little biscuits, and we knew that that was a native staple, really, because of all the reference to it that we had learned over the years from those native people. And so many fun stories came about, and the archaeologists were absolutely blown away. We're talking about nationally renowned archaeologists. They said, we've never done this in our lives. I mean, we're talking about from the American Museum of Natural History and out there in Nevada, what was his name? That archaeologist in the White Mountains. And
Bob Bettinger.
yeah, Bob Bettinger. These are famous archaeologists. They said, we've never even thought about what they must have eaten. And I said, well, you know, they had to live on something. And so they were just fascinated with all of this and had me walk around and show them the plants that we got those foodstuffs from. And so it all came about. White bark pine became the pinon of the Rocky Mountains, right? Pinon is just south of here, New Mexico. But it's the same Pinus genus, right? And so when they ate those pine nuts, they couldn't believe it. They just said, these are so delicious. How come nobody does it? I said, well, people eat them. Yeah, they've been eating them for millennia, really. And of course, the animals do too. Squirrels, bears. That's the whole trilogy. Is grizzly bears are dependent on those white bark pine nuts, and red squirrels are the intermediate host, if you will, and then humans are the other, and the Clark's nutcracker. And so it all goes around, and guess who replants the pine nuts? Clark's nutcrackers and the bears. Yeah, they make those wonderful big caches, and so it all just seems to work. It's how life works. That's what I love about ethnobotany, is that it makes you be able to see the plant life, the botany, if you will, through the eyes of native people and even the animals, of how life works and how important it is for there to be a balance. And that balance is between the animals and the plants, is that we need them and they need us. And so it's just beautiful if you think about it. And I hadn't for a long time until I really discovered, wait, this is amazing.
I might jump here. Meredith was talking about this wonderful meal. We call it a paleo meal that was up on, I won't say where. It was one of our discoveries that we made with our team on a very important archaeological site. And this group of top shelf anthropologists and archaeologists, a zoologist, were met up on this mountain to look at this very important prehistoric site that we had discovered up there. I called it that, or I said that I think there was more PhDs on that square mile of mountain than any place in Wyoming at the time. But it gets what I'm getting at here. It was probably the climax of Meredith's ethnobotany career, in that we put that paleo meal together. We had 23 entrees of vegetables and or plants, animals, fish, all kinds of things. Put it out there, and some of these professional archaeologists and anthropologists had eaten some of this stuff, but none of them had eaten all of this stuff. And it gets back to educating, and you don't have to be a child to learn something. Yeah. Here we were teaching professionals about how this mountain Shoshone ate, and they were it was a wonderful meal and a wonderful time, and they're still talking about it.
Can we do that again? Yeah, and we did.
And so my point that I'm trying to get at is that was probably the best paleo meal we ever had, and it was so neat to teach older people, if you will, teaching people. As I mentioned earlier, I was taught, maybe not deliberately as much as I was just put in a place. When Meredith and I were outfitting, we were often in a position where we could put young people in a place to where they might learn something. And through our 30-some years of outfitting, taking people back in the greater Yellowstone wildernesses and learning all these things, most of the children wanted to learn about things, and they learned at different paces, different degrees. A few of them really didn't catch on, but a lot of them were just fascinated. And we would just show them things, sometimes kind of just put them in a situation to where they learn. Sometimes we would do things with them, like if there was some young people that were really into, what's this, what's that, I'd have them make a bird list. We would, during a week's camping trip, horse packing trip back in the mountains, we would make a bird list. And I'd have a bird book there, and we'd see something, and I'd say, okay, look at that. What do you see? What colors is it? How big is it? Here, look it up in this book. And they'd look it up there, and they go, oh, that's a camp robber, or whatever it was. Yep, that's what it is. So they'd write that down. So that was a wonderful opportunity to actually really try and teach young people about what's going on back here in the wild country.
And just backing up on that a little bit, is that I said that we started outfitting by sheep hunting, and that didn't last very long, a few years, but so many of the hunters, and this is all one-on-one hunts, it'd be Tory and I and the hunter out there for a week, and after the first couple years, some of the hunters would say, whoa, this is an amazing trip. I mean, getting the ram is great, but my family would love to come out here and do this with you. Can we bring them next summer? So guess what happened? We evolved into a natural history outfitting business instead of a hunting outfitting business. We didn't hunt anymore after that. We hunted for ourselves, but we didn't outfit hunting. And it was so much easier. Tory says, boy, there's a game changer for you. Putting people onto a Boone and Crockett paintbrush, Indian paintbrush.
They don't
As
run
opposed
away.
to a full curl ram.
They don't run away from you like the ram does. Yeah, we when we first got into business, we had to focus on big game hunting, like a lot of outfitters. Especially, I specialize in bighorn sheep hunting, but we soon figured out it was a lot more profitable to take 4, 5, 6 people. We operated on a fairly small scale,
A family.
real mom and pop operation. Meredith and I did all the work, but we could take 4 or 5 or 6 people out there and actually make more money for less work. Trying to find somebody trophy ram is a lot like work, and it's you don't always find one. And so that was I usually had very good success, but a couple times when my hunter did not get a ram, it was a disappointment. But it was very easy to show a family a fishing stream or a field of flowers or an eagle flying overhead or a moose eating lilies in a pond or things of that nature. It was pretty easy to do that, and so our business really evolved from hunting focus to just a natural history type.
And that was
focus.
much more education.
And so
Yes.
and education is just a natural step or part of that whole process.
And education, I mean, that's such a key theme, whether it's in your personal hobbies or your trade as an outfitter. And Meredith, you mentioned, resourcefulness as being a key priority and understanding how ecosystems and things work together in delicate balance. In your lifetime of educators, how have you found that you've either developed other conservationists or helped change the way someone may think about their role in conservation?
In so many ways, it's hard to even pinpoint it down, but Tory worked through the Wyoming Wildlife Federation. He was president there. I was the Wyoming office representative, if you will, in charge of the Wyoming office for the Greater Yellowstone Coalition. And so we were key in projects, I guess you'd say, such as wolf recovery to Yellowstone. That was huge, and I know it could be even today controversial, but it has been predator-prey balance, ecosystem protection and development, and just success story in ways that we anticipated it would, but had no idea it would be as big as it is. And we were even there soon after the wolves came back, and we were leading winter trips up there. We call them winter wolf watch trips, but before we just called them Yellowstone winter trips. And we got out there with Norm Bishop, and he was the head of the wolf program for Yellowstone. And he said, "Do you want to see the wolves?" And because they had just arrived about 2 months before, and he says, "We can't go over to the site of the enclosure, but we can hear them over at Rose Creek." So we went over there, and sure enough, ooh, oh, I had the chills up my spine. I thought I was going to start crying. And it was just such a success story. Even then, we knew it was going to be, because once they got out into the ecosystem, they really ranged out. And even our guests with the outfitting, when the first time we heard them out there in the wild, it was on the Yellowstone River near Hawks Rest, famous place. And we were camped there, and at night we heard those wolves. By then they had dispersed out of Yellowstone. That was a year or two later. And people came over to the campfire in the morning. "Did you hear the wolves?" And I said, "Absolutely. Those are the ones that we helped bring back to Yellowstone." And they said, "Oh my goodness, this is the highlight of our trip." Yeah. And they're not bleeding hearts. They just like to see the whole wildlife, pieces of a puzzle put together, put back together, is really the way it looked at. So they were just so excited about it, and then we did get to see them too. And there were those little spots out there in Yellowstone Meadows, but it was just so amazing that it was all able to happen, and still, it's still a success story in spite of the sometimes controversy. Yeah.
Thank you.
I've got a couple stories to add. My stories are always long, but I'll try and make them short. But one time we had a young man on a pack trip. I think he was 12 years old. He'd never been out of the city from Kansas City. And his father and then another man and his daughter, the four, were on this trip. And this little boy was very polite, very quiet, very curious. But we got into camp and he was all eyes and ears. He was like we set him on Mars. He had no idea there was country like this or what things were. And for about the first couple days, he was just quiet. He didn't say anything, but he took in every word and everything. He was just absorbing it like a sponge. And within a few days, all of a sudden, we could just watch this young man blossom right in front of our eyes. All of a sudden, it's like, wow, nature. This is pretty cool. And pretty soon he was out going, walking all over the place, walking up the stream, down the stream, gathering water, flowers, what bird's that, this, that, and everything. And after a couple of days, his dad looked at us and looked at him and said, "Who is this kid?" It was really
And he
a fun,
thanked us.
really
He
a
said,
fun
I have
thing.
never seen this side of him.
So again, we
Yeah.
just have tried to put people in a place where they can learn. Another quick story, if I can.
Yeah.
About 30 miles down the road at the Crowheart School, it's a one-room school. There's about 15 students there. About half of them are enrolled Shoshone and Arapaho children. Cheryl Epp, the teacher, invited me down a few years ago to talk about the Mountain Shoshone people. And so I went to the school and I talked about different things. And you never know how much a child is absorbing or if they're even listening or what. But Cheryl wrote me a thank you letter after that. And she said, by the way, one of the kids, he was a Shoshone boy. She said he went home and his mom looked out the window in the backyard and he had built a wiki up. And I thought, wow, how cool is that?
Yeah.
And so education like that sometimes happens real, and you see it. Other times you hope you just plant a seed that germinates and comes to fruition later on. A personal story for me is I've probably gained my natural my interest in conservation and the natural world one step at a time. But I remember one big leap I took was here in DuBois quite a few years ago. There was a wonderful game warden by the name of Kay Bowles that lived here. He left us way too early with a heart attack, but he really changed my life. Never said a word, but just the way he was, just me watching him for the few years I knew him and listening to him, hearing his stories and that sort of thing, just who he was made me realize that I can be a better conservationist than what I am at the time. Just he didn't say a word to me. It was just what he did. His manner. He was a heck of a game warden, a heck of a horseman. But just his passion and devotion to his trade, to the wildlife, rubbed off on me, and it really changed my life. And he never said a word. He didn't know that. And I miss him a lot. There's a rock cairn up on Bowles Pass, we call it, up on the backside of Coffin Butte today. And every time I walk up there, I put another stone on his monument up there. And his wife,
Thank you, Kay.
his wife, who was remarried to Mrs. Banks today, every time I see her, I always tell her, I took another rock up there to Kay's place and put it up there. So he did for me what I hope I maybe have done for other people.
It sounds like you guys are doing that and you're succeeding with it.
We're
and
trying.
you're already seeing results, and you're special people for taking the time to do that, and especially for taking care of Kay's grave that way. That's a lot of dedication. So thank you. for that and for that.
It's a good thing.
You don't have to thank
It's a good
us.
thing.
For sharing his legacy.
Yes,
Well,
yes. And in terms of getting back to education and ethnobotany,
Mm-hmm.
we were invited to be part of this group, Restoring Shoshone Ancestral Foods, which I'll share with you here.
Okay.
And this meets down at Fort Washakie for the most part, and it's kids in the local schools on the reservation and reservation residents, if you will, native people, both ancestral, tribal interests in food, as well as just people who have garnered that knowledge from generations. My grandma used to tell me to always to have hawthorn because it's good for your heart. And I'd say, can we go over and see your hawthorn? And she said, oh sure, it's over there by the Sacagawea grave. And it really is. And so it's a sacred site in itself, and here's this huge hawthorn patch. And to this day, I take hawthorn tincture just because it's a good thing to do. And this group is way fun. We do a lot of things together, and had a field trip. They asked me to come up and talk about the different plants. I took Osha, and it's just a fun group who has that reverence for plants, and especially ancestral plants that are native here. And a fun story on Tory is that many years ago, we went back in here, and again, it's an archaeological site, so I can't talk about it particularly, but Tory had found a wiki-up, an original wiki-up, and there's not too many of those left. And he wanted to show it to this archaeologist from Laramie, and you had to access it at that time of year through the res. And so it was only legal if you had reservation people giving permission. So we invited them from Fort Washakie, and these two came up, and they walked part way up with us, and the archaeologist and I walked all the way up. I knew how to get to the wiki up and to show him, and he wanted to document it, GPS it, and all, do that for the archives. And Tory said when I got back that the tribal elders had arrived with headaches and probably dehydration, and so he had given them some willow buds from the plants that were right along the river. You know what willow is? It's a salix, is the genus, salix, Salix.
Okay.
And guess what that stands for? Salix. Salicylic acid, as in aspirin.
aspirin.
Oh.
Willows
And
are
so
aspirin.
he picked a couple of buds,
Have
and
you
at
ever
this
seen a
time of
moose with a
year, that's
headache? No.
that's what you see is buds, and those are going to be next year's branches, right? And leaves. So he said, take 2 and call me in the morning. And then gave him a big swig of water, and we were all laughing at the irony of the gringo teaching the elders about ethnobotany and medicinal plants.
I called it a reverse Captain Smith Pocahontas deal, where I was helping the native maiden. Just to kind of round up what we're talking about, this education thing, a point I made, I want to restate it again. Education starts very young in ways we may or may not even be aware of, and it goes a lifetime. If you ever think you've learned everything or whatever, you're wrong. You're always learning something cool about the outside, nature. You're building on your conservation knowledge and your ethic and your contact with the wild world out there. And that's why I'm so tickled with what the Bighorn Sheep Center does as an educational facility. Education is where it is at, and it's our future. And that's why I support you and salute you all for trying to help people build their own education outside natural education and their own conservation ethics. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Shirley. So, do you want to jump to the legislation?
Let's do it.
Okay.
Meredith and Tory, you two have hands-on experience in conservation legislation. You've mentioned lobbying in 1984, but Meredith,
For the Wyoming Wilderness Act, right?
tell us more. So, a few questions we have is, what was it like to be a part of key legislation in the 80s? And what issues in the legislation around conservation concern you most today?
Well, wilderness was a big one because I could see that land protection, public land protection in particular, was one of the best ways of protecting wildlife habitat and keeping development. It's essentially a national conservation easement, if you will, if you want to look at it through different eyes. That's for private land, but still, when you designate land, and we were always going in tens or hundreds of thousands of acres, and of course there's millions of acres nationally in designated wilderness, you have to go through Congress. And unfortunately, we have a delegation that's not only difficult to work with, but pro-development and anti-protection. And so we ended up getting a senator from Ohio to be our what would you call it, a sponsor of the bill, the Wyoming Wilderness Act. And we worked on it for years here, getting support, and we did get support, and we passed the bill through Congress, and that's what I went back and lobbied on. And I was really amazed at how poorly we were represented by our own delegation. And I explained to them, as an outfitter, how important wilderness is for the wilderness outfitter business, the hunters, the hunting outfitters, just all of the different entities around the state who are benefiting from tourism. For a starter, all the towns that are around Yellowstone, they're benefiting from all that. All they could think about was oil and gas and mining. And they made it abundantly clear. We just don't agree with you. Sorry. And so John Cyberling from Ohio was our sponsor, and we got the bill through. It was amended, but we got most of the areas that we wanted to protected, and including on Whiskey Mountain. Yes. And then after that, my friend Lynn Kinter, who is now the state botanist in Idaho, she's near and dear to my heart. She used to live right over here at Spring Ranch, and she got her PhD in botany. She went to UW, and she and I developed a group called Friends of the Red Desert, and trying to get those wilderness study areas, WSAs, on BLM, designated wilderness. And we're still trying today. And I mean, that's been decades, 2 or 3 decades. And there's too much distraction for our delegation, too much opportunity for oil and gas and mining. Now they're talking about uranium again. And so there's just too many things out there in the desert that they want. And I just sat down with them and said, how about you pick your spots and I'll pick my spots, and we'll see what we can come negotiate a settlement here. And they were interested.
Right?
Yes, exactly. And so here we are, and we did succeed with the Wyoming Wilderness Act, but we haven't succeeded with the Red Desert or any of the BLM WSAs. And the world isn't over yet, so here we are.
how can young conservationists get involved and make sure what happens needs to happen?
They should join a conservation group of their interest. And Tory went back with me a couple of times to Washington to lobby on, what was the name of that one group, program that we were lobbying for?
Teaming with Wildlife.
Teaming with Wildlife. And that was through National Wildlife Federation, and he was the president of the Wyoming Wildlife Federation. And we went back a couple of different times as hunters from Wyoming, going down and explaining to them why teaming with wildlife was a good thing to do and to put these funds into conservation programs. And we would always try to mentor young people to either go along or to do programs in schools. I did a lot of programs in schools. And I started this is an aside, the Wind River Recycle Center in Du Bois. A friend of mine and Marie and I did. We said, we need a recycle center here. And we started it. Somebody gave us that land that's next to, before the bank and the post office, Tegler's. And we built it out of plywood. And literally it was all volunteer. And in those days, you didn't see a market for recycled, so we had to raise money to ship that recycled goods to the markets. And even the glass, which nowadays nobody recycles glass, went clear to Boulder to make beer for Coors. And we would ship paper down to Casper, and then they'd have processing plants where it would all get used, plastic and everything. We recycled more then than they recycle now in most places, just because there's more diversity. And it was all volunteer. I never got a penny. None of these people got a penny, and everybody chipped in and helped. And the only thing we had to raise money for was those trucks coming back and forth to pay for their gas. And so it was a great success story, and I loved it. Was after 12 years, the county came to me, because I'd already gone and talked to the solid waste district a number of times about how to get recycling going more in the county. And they said, so Meredith, how would you like to move that recycle center up to the landfill? Perfect. Take her away. And so it all went up there, and you can see what's there now is that all those recycle bins, and
Wow.
and I'm really pleased that they did that. And there's a lot of support for recycling in Du Bois, and there's another angle of conservation, if you will, because it's not going into the ground, it's being reused, and hopefully not have to create more waste and have to mine more aluminum or whatever.
Yeah, and thank you for doing that, because if I worked in an industrial setting for a while, one small I worked at the printing press.
Right.
The amount of waste,
Staggering.
It's disturbing.
Yes.
So thank you for doing that, because I can't imagine how much just gets wasted in a large setting, and we have many large settings in this country.
Yes, and then even lots of small households.
Yeah.
And then I set up recycling bins at the schools. You can't believe how those kids glommed onto that. Oh my God. We love recycling. We always go out and pick up stuff and put it in our recycling bins. And I mean, I just love to go talk to kids. They have that squeaky little voice and their big eyes. Oh, they just take it all in. It's so fun. Yeah, and they're learning. They're learning how I can make a difference.
Yeah.
I wanted to comment a little bit about legislation we've been involved with and that sort of thing. Many years ago, when we really got involved with conservation efforts and issues, there was a biologist that gave me some words of wisdom that I hang on to. He said, wildlife management is easy. It's the people management that is impossible. And that's the truth. We've dealt with so many legislative issues on a local, county, state, national level that it'd take me a long time to list them all. When I really got involved, like a lot of people, was it was around late 1970s, maybe 1980, where there was down in the checkerboard country down in southern Wyoming, where every other section of land is privately owned and every other section is BLM as for the most part. There was a rancher there that wanted to develop a coal mine on his property or near his property, but there were a lot of antelope that had to migrate through that area. And he said, well, I'll just fix that. And so he built a antelope-proof fence along his private land through that checkerboard, deliberately trying to cut off that antelope migration. It was called the Red Rim. The antelope, it was a bad winter like we're having now. The antelope stacked up against that fence and died in droves. And the state came unglued. And a lot of us really got involved with wildlife management and legislative issues and things at that point. It was wrong, and we said so. And so that was probably really how I really jumped into the deep end of things, trying to put my money where my mouth is and trying to be involved with some of this stuff.
And stop the
Um,
unlawful blockage of migrations.
and
And now you can see that they're building migration corridor bridges and underpasses like they're going to do through here because of so much roadkill. So
Right.
there's a 180-degree flip on where some of that can go if you can get that legislation through. That unlawful blockage of migration movement by wildlife is important.
Well, and with legislative things, a lot of them, there's a finish to some of them, like Red Rim finally got resolved. There's some issues that keep coming up time after time after time, like the state trying to get control of federal lands. That's been going on for generations, maybe from territorial days in this state. That comes up from time to time. We fight it, and it'll come up again. You can bet on that. Most of the battles we fought, if you can even get to an agreement and a compromise to where nobody's happy but everybody can live with it, you're doing well. A lot of issues we worked on did not go the way we would have liked to see them come out. One exception to that that always comes to mind is we worked really hard on the issue of a lot of the hunters and the outfitters that were around the boundary of Yellowstone National Park were luring the elk out of the park to salt licks. And
Baiting.
Salt baits is what
Yeah.
it came to. And I found out about that issue and we got deeply involved with that issue. It just did not seem like, as a hunter, it did not seem like a fair chase situation. It did not seem ethical to me to lure elk out of Yellowstone Park and when they get 100 yards from the boundary, shoot them. That just did not sit well with me and many others. And so that was a big issue. And Clarine Law, who recently passed away, she was our lawmaker out of Jackson, wonderful wonderful woman. We went over and sat down with her with a bunch of photos. And even though she was a business person and she really supported outfitting, we showed her, here's what's going on there. And she saw the issue, understood it was not a good thing. She went down to Cheyenne the next legislative session and got a law passed that prohibits the baiting of big game animals. And so we did win that one. Yes, not very many. I always like to remind people, if you're going to fight for wildlife, don't wear your good clothes because it's a nasty, dirty, grueling business. But you got to be in there trying. I was going to mention too, when we were involved with a lot of this stuff, we met with a lot of different people. The late Senator Craig Thomas sat right here in this very spot one time. He was traveling through the country and he asked if he could sit down with us and talk about different issues. And so he sat right here. And so we've been involved on a legislative level for quite a little bit. And of course, we served Senator Thomas apple pie. What else would you feed a senator? But apple pie, of course. And he got a kick out of it. But we had a good visit about a number of different topics. But I guess it kind of illustrates how we were involved more deeply than what we are now, perhaps.
This is Garrett with the National Bighorn Sheep Center, and I would like to take a moment to thank you all for watching. If you are interested in supporting Tory Taylor, his online bookstore is linked in the description. Please pick up one or more of his books. And if you are interested in supporting the Sheep Center, please visit our website, bighorn.org. Check the For Donors pages for information on how you can help. Thank you. So, back from a short break. Thank you again for watching. Tory and Meredith. So you two have mentioned the importance of ethics in conservation. What are the key components to your ethics, and how do you live them? How do you share them with others?
Go ahead.
It's going to be ethics is it's kind of a fuzzy subject. It's different meanings for different people in a way. We talk about hunting ethics, and they seem to be a little more cut and dried on what is an ethical hunter and what is not. that pretty much follows laws. But on the other hand, too, there's a little bit of squishiness there, and that my ethics about hunting is not the same as hunting ethics for other hunters. And that's not to say either one of us are right or wrong. But for example, I seldom ever kill a predator. It's just not my thing. I seldom kill anything. In fact, I never really kill anything unless I'm going to eat it. I don't shoot animals just to watch them die. I respect them more than that. That's my ethic. I eat everything that I kill. I don't shoot far distances. Don't want to shoot far distances. I believe it takes a lot better hunter to shoot something at 25 yards than it does at 500 yards. Much better hunter. I don't like long distance hunting at all. Shooting, I should say. So my ethics are different than some hunters. That's okay. But as far as like a conservation ethic or an ethic towards nature and wildlife, I think there's maybe certain set rules, but I think everybody's got to develop their own, and hopefully that it will come to the point to where people will realize that they are not apart from nature, but they are a part of nature, and that they will live their lives as best they can to help everything from wildlife to insects to nematodes to everything. We're all connected. And when people start understanding that, perhaps they'll try and leave as small of a footprint on the earth as they possibly can. None of us are perfect. But if we have that ethic to where we just try to do the best we can
with what we have,
then I think we'll be a lot better off. I would recommend to everybody for a start, if they've never read Aldo Leopold's Sand County Almanac, if you have not ever read that, start there. As I mentioned before, I believe in teaching outdoor education, or teaching people about nature and outdoors with hands-on experience outside. But if you want to look at a good book, start with Aldo Leopold, and then the list goes on and on. Read Rachel Carson. Read many other folks that have written for hunters. Read Andy Russell. He's an outfitter that's gone now from Canada. There are many people you can read, but start with Sand County Almanac.
Well, and that's it. Aldo Leopold was the original who taught about and wrote about the land ethic. And that's the respect for the land and to see how ecosystems work. See how it all works together. There's a balance out there, and we need to be part of it. We aren't all the time, but we should be. And that Sand County Almanac really does explain to people how conservation should work through that land ethic, and it's enlightening, and to me it should be required reading. And also Rachel Carson, as Tory said, she's one of my mentors too. Jane Goodall, people like that, they just are mentors to us all, even though we may never have met them. I've met Jane Goodall twice, and she really is a mentor to me. I walked up to her the second time. It was down in New Mexico. She was over in Las Vegas, New Mexico, and I walked up and I said, Jane, and I said, I met you up there in Jackson with these friends of ours, Ted and Addie Dunn. Oh, I remember, and we had a great talk. And a friend of ours' daughter was one of the winners in the science fair that day, and she was going to be a judge. She goes from place to place in her Roots and Shoots program, which is cultivating young people to appreciate and respect conservation. And the Roots and Shoots program, she went to Las Vegas. They had one there in their schools, and they said, would you be a judge in our science fair? And our friend Raina's daughter Soleil, as in son, she had a project there, and so we went up and congratulated her on getting to that point. And I said, so what do you want to do? And she says, I want to be just like Jane Goodall when I grow up. And Tory, he's the wonderful one that is brilliant about thinking outside the box and new ideas, and he says, "You know what we ought to do? We ought to get one of Jane's books and get her to autograph it to Soleil."
Mm.
And we did that day,
Wow.
and I went up to her after her program up there at the United World College. That was right across from our place. And I put a little piece of paper in the book, and I said, Soleil. I said, "Jane, would you autograph this for the young woman whose science project you judged?" And she won. And and she still had that book the last time I saw her. She's just gone to first year of college down there at Highlands University. And it's that kind of experiences that you can see are making a difference in young people's eyes and lives. Is that I want to be just like Jane Goodall when I grow up. Oh my goodness, what a goal, right?
Yeah.
So you just never know when you'll say something or do something, or something will happen to where it'll spark something in a young person's mind. It's a beautiful thing to see.
Mm.
Yeah.
Good.
So land ethic is great. As Tory was talking about hunting, then you've got fair chase, and that whole idea needs to be cultivated more. I mean, we've still got people chasing animals on snowmobiles and ATVs and that sort of thing, and they need to get busted. That's all it is to it, and develop a land ethic and a fair chase ethic. And so we try to live that in our lives and cultivate it for other people to live in their lives as well. Because it's very important to have that respect for life out there.
And I might add a little more about my hunting ethic, or my ethics along those lines, is that the thought has slipped my mind. I went blank. Oh, I know what I was going to say. Getting back to my ethics, I always keep in mind that on a national level, kind of a small group of people hunt, and a small group of people are anti-hunting, but in the middle is most of the general public in the whole nation. And I'm aware of that, and also I try and think about how my actions reflect on people that do not hunt. Do I conduct myself in a way with fair chase principles, and how I treat wildlife and that sort of thing, how I treat people that don't like hunting or people that don't know about hunting? I always keep that in mind. And to tell you the truth, I've know some people that are pretty much against hunting for different reasons, but I can sit down and talk to them, and I tell them how I think and what I do, how I look at the world, how I look at wildlife and that sort of thing, and they get it. They understand where I'm coming from, and I get it why they are upset with certain things that some hunters have done and are still doing. And so if people will just kind of, if hunters will keep that in mind on how their actions reflect on other people, it will help the hunting in the future, I believe. And don't approach it with the attitude that if you don't hunt, you're not any good, and you're not worthy of even being around, or blowing up your neck and all that sort of stuff. That doesn't cut it. It doesn't get us anywhere. And so I try and think of other people and put that as part of my hunting ethic formula, if you will.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's good to consider, considering not just our actions, but how our actions come off to other people, and how we've been talking about how the smallest actions influence people into greater actions. We want to consider, we want to try to make our actions influence people toward actions that help the environment. So that's a terrific way to think. Thank you.
Well, doesn't hurt to be able to talk to people.
True.
Yelling at each other, screaming at each other really doesn't get us very far.
Yeah, we've
even though I'm guilty of it sometimes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, the first official members of our Legacy Society we think about estates and we think about how we're going to how you two as individuals will pass down your part of your lifetime, everything that you've worked for towards your life. And one of that pieces that you worked for is where we have the honor and luxury to meet with you today in this home of yours. We know that you two placed a conservation easement on this property, similar to the namesakes of our up and coming classroom, Charlie and Sue Beck, who were educators
Right.
Of Trail Lake Road. So, in light of, so my question is thinking about the future and the concept of generational safekeeping. Can you tell us what were some motivations behind placing an easement on this property?
It was a no-brainer. We had thought about it for years. We've had this place since the mid-'80s. Well, let's see, almost 40 years. And we said, but we always want it to look just like this. I mean, we've done our impact and tried to be respectful of the land and leave it better than we found it. And there were no buildings here when we bought it, but we've tried to minimize all of that. And you can see how good the solar is working, that sort of thing. And we conducted a business out of here with the horses, and I've always tried to use the land respectfully. And we said we always want it to be like that, even when we're not here. And so a lot of concern, I guess you'd say, from some people is that you don't want to manage the land from the grave. Well, I do in this case, because I want it to always be with as little impact on it as possible. The 2 out of 3 parcels that this is, we bought this in 3 different sections. This one has development on it, and what you can see is this 2-acre parcel is developed, and the rest of it is all open, and that's why the migrations go back and forth. There were, I don't know, a dozen elk across the road there this morning, and dozens of deer going back and forth. And then that parcel over there and the what we call the gooseberry pasture, those have no buildings on it, and they won't ever because of this conservation easement. And we just thought that that was important because with the housing boom and development boom, it was inevitable that these pieces are going to get chopped up and sold, and there's going to be more and more, even subdivisions on there. And so we didn't want that to happen. So we started researching it, and it did take a long time, a couple years, but we found the best way to work was through the Jackson Hole Land Trust. We had tried to work with other conservation interests, but they seemed to think that this was too small a piece. And we disagreed because we said, they're all pieces of the puzzle. And there's conservation easements all over here, there's public land over here. They all fit together if you don't have a big subdivision and blockage of wildlife movement in the way. It'd be like having a dam out here. We don't want that either. And so for all the right reasons, we worked with Jackson Hole Land Trust, and it was a way to pay it forward, if you will. It was literally part of our legacy, our conservation legacy, to be able to see this land be what it is today in perpetuity.
And why is that important?
Because we respect the land and we have conservation ethic, and we love having wildlife around, not because we like to see them, but because they're there. They're part of this whole ecosystem, this land, and deserve to be here as much as we do. Maybe more. They're native.
There's so much power of place, Meredith.
Yes, we have a huge sense of place here.
And for ancestors that were here before, and I use that term loosely, or the pioneers of this valley, such as Charlie and Sue Beck, they brought with them values.
That's right.
And it's the values that they helped, that drove them to build their cabins,
Yep.
the education programs that they conducted. And that those values are inherent, are like built within the land that they walk through each day.
Exactly.
And to preserve that is preserving those values.
Yes. I had the utmost respect for Sue and Charlie. They're some of the first people I met when I moved to Trail Lake, to Tory Valley, to do that Bighorn sheep study. And they were there, for about half the year. And then they would go out to California for the winter. And we would do so many things together. I just loved going over there and hearing their stories. And they said, just like I said, it was a no-brainer that we were going to sell that land, give it to the Game and Fish Department, so it would be wildlife habitat in perpetuity. And same thing as here, there's just that little block of buildings on a couple acres, and then all the rest of it is free for wildlife movement. And they were very considerate about what was happening while they were there and what would go on in perpetuity. So that was their way of paying it forward. And they told me they were just so pleased that the Game and Fish worked with them so easily to set that whole transfer up.
And now we use that conservation camp for its intended purpose to help educate youth from all over the nation, urban and suburban areas, so that they can have their own experiences and develop their own relationship
Exactly.
with the land.
Yes. It's a
Charlie
great
and
place.
Sue would be very pleased with that. I'm sure they're looking down on us saying, good
Smiling.
job, this is what we wanted. Obviously, Sue and Charlie Beck, who we knew very well, had a strong sense of place and a love of the valley and all of that. And that's why they did what they did. They sold their land to the Game and Fish Department for habitat. They could have kept it, they could have chopped it into subdivisions, made mega homes up there around the lakes, and made millions and millions of dollars. But to them, the land as it was and for sheep habitat was priceless. And they and other people in this valley too have that same ethic, land ethic. And so we followed along, putting a conservation easement on this property, not because of them, but to join them in trying to keep as much wildlife habitat available as possible in this land. As Meredith said, it was a no-brainer for us. When we don't need this place anymore, we want it left as it is. It's very important for the deer. We have deer on this property year-round now. We have a bald eagle pair that this will be their 4th year. I'm pretty sure they'll come back this spring and nest again over in our cottonwoods. As I mentioned earlier, I saw elk out this window and elk out that window today. It's just a very special place, and so we wanted to keep it that way. If this was ever chopped into to lots or turned into a trailer park or something along those lines, or even mega mansions along the river, it just would change everything, and it would degrade the wildlife habitat. And so we wanted to leave something behind, and I hope other people will consider that and look at conservation easements. The program that the Sheep Center helped with the other night was wonderful. That's a great way for people that have land. It doesn't matter how many acres or how big a place they have. It's something to look into. And I also wanted to say how honored Meredith and I are to be Legacy Society members, your first ones, I understand, because the Bighorn Sheep Center, we believe in your goals and your message, and that education is important, and so we're honored to be in that position to keep the ethic and a land ethic going in this valley, and you all are doing that. So thanks for that.
We thank you also. And as an aside, before we reach our final point, you're an author, firstly. So anyone watching this or listening, please look up Tory Taylor's books. They're terrific. You are a book collector. And as I understand, your collection focuses on conservation. So if you don't mind my asking, when did you start that?
Wow.
And we were born. Pretty much.
Well,
Seriously.
Yeah.
We've been bibliophiles forever. I've
Yeah.
always been that way, and he was too.
I
We
don't know,
love to read.
Speak for yourself. I was not a very good student. I didn't.
Yeah,
I
but you love to read books.
I had other things to do when I was young than to go to school and learn things.
You knew it all.
So go ahead.
Yeah.
If you want to continue, or I can jump in.
Well, we've talked about legacy, and as Tory said, we're honored and proud to be first legacy members for your legacy society. And I thought about it with Sarah. We were tag teaming, right? And when we were trying to fundraise together and some ideas, and other groups had invited us to be legacy members as well. And I said, the Sheep Center ought to do that. That's a great idea. And it is paying it forward. It's like Sue and Charlie think, is that how can I make a difference in the future? And in terms of legacy, it's a contribution, and that was why it was so wonderful when we had the gathering up there at the conservation camp, Trail Lake, and Dita and John were there, and you and I visited with them and had dinner, and we said, this is wonderful that we're all talking on the same page, and you had talked about the classroom, and then I think it was Dita got the great idea of we could be donors to the Beck Center, if you will. And I don't know if we even had a name for it at that point, but she was so close with them. They essentially were family. And that's how we first knew each other, Dita and John, via the Becks, and took them on pack trips, and it was just wonderful. And so then they came forward and gave a major donation as well toward this and the Beck Center, if you will. And I thought, this is how it ought to work. Everybody wants to get to this same goal, and here's how we can do it, is by paying it forward. So this Legacy Society, I see as a way to do whatever you can do. And you may not have much money. You may not be sending out thousands of dollars for Giving Tuesday or whatever the function, the celebration is that you're trying to meet a certain fundraising goal. But what's very interesting, and I would encourage others who are supporters of the Sheep Center to just consider the Legacy Society in terms of adding the Sheep Center to your estate plan or your will. And all that means, and this was explained to me long before I talked to you, is just put them down. Any of the groups are in our estate plan, and now the Sheep Center is as well, and a certain percentage is going to go to each of those groups to support their mission. And the Sheep Center's mission is one that we agree with, and we just feel like we're paying it forward. We want to do this because you are going to carry on our legacy for us, essentially. And we hope that other people can see that, because what that really means is that it's not out of pocket today, and they can donate any time that they want to. But if they just want to put the Sheep Center in their estate plan or will, then when they pass on, there it goes to you. Once the settlement is made and the check's in the mail, it goes off to the Sheep Center or whoever, your children, whoever you want it to go to. And that it's such a no-brainer. It's such an easy thing to do, is to make each of those things that are important to you, whether it's your children, your grandchildren, the Sheep Center, any of the conservation efforts that are out there, just put them all, list them all down there, and make sure that they're notarized and ready to be dispersed to, if you will, when you're ready.
I'm very excited about the plans for the additions onto the Sheep Center. I can't wait. I want to be there when you do the shovel thing on that, because that I think that will expand the opportunities at the Sheep Center, and I'm really excited about that. And getting back to your question, Garrett, about books and legacy, leaving things behind. Meredith and I are starting to think about that kind of stuff. We discovered that they don't put pockets on coffins, and so it's time to think about what is going to happen when we're not around. And the book collection you're talking about out in my man cave out there, for a number of years I've collected hunting books, mostly everything west of the Mississippi and east of the Pacific Ocean, and from Mexico to Alaska. I really focus on that, and there's about 300-400 volumes out there altogether. Some of them have a little value, but I would like to think that in its entirety, if anybody ever wanted to know anything about hunting, mostly about North American stuff, a little African, but if anybody ever wanted to know anything about hunting, there it is. And I would like to see that stay as a collection, and I've always dreamed about, after the additions on the Sheep Center are done, maybe there'll be room for a library, a resource there of that sort of thing. Actually, Meredith has many more times conservation and botany books, environmental type books, things of that nature. She has more in her collection of that type of book.
And there
than-
just
than
happened to
what
be
I
a
have.
few Bighorn sheep books. that
So
we were talking about it today, and I said, you know, it would be a great idea in this edition to have a legacy library.
A legacy library.
I love it, and
Yeah.
we would be glad to donate to that, and have a lot of books that would obviously go in there, and we would feel good about it because they're being protected and they're being able to be used by people in the future and in the right place.
And we would be honored.
Yeah,
well, and it would give you all another branch of your whole meeting your goals and your mission statement on being able to provide a research library to people. I wouldn't recommend they take books out because they tend to never come back. But
True.
if people wanted to come in there and find out a lot about the history of conservation, Meredith's got lots of books along those lines. If they want to find out about hunting, we have lots of books along those lines. So there's an opportunity there for all of us to add to a legacy of the Sheep Center through what we have.
We're beyond grateful. Our objective with the Beck Center is our education is our primary mission statement. So in this library, we'll have the opportunity to educate and to preserve the ethics you discussed, educate more, and improve future generations of conservationists. So we're grateful.
We're happy to help.
Thank you.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Well,
Don't you think that would fit in this
Yes.
new edition?
yes, it would.
Yeah,
And-
so
and I should
while you're drafting out your blueprints, keep that in mind.
Yes.
A little cubby hole that's only the size of this house.
Yeah.
well, it could take up a wall of some of the addition.
Yeah, I'm teasing.
I was going to mention, it came to mind too, that Charlie and Sue had quite a library in their lodge up there at one time, books of all kinds. But when the Audubon camp was using that facility, the conservation camp today, the Audubon folks had a whole wall full of books. Unfortunately, they were available to anybody, and a few people decided that maybe they would borrow a few, and that led to a problem. In fact, somebody walked away with several boxes full, and so that's not a good thing. But the point is that the Becks valued that educational thing, as did the Audubon camp, as do we, and that fits right in with your mission statement.
And again, we are very grateful, and nobody's going to be walking out with boxes of your books. You don't have to worry about that.
Well, if it's
We'll make sure
conducted
that-
like a reference library, that's
Well,
exactly how it would be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
reference resource library.
Yeah.
That's possible.
Exactly. That's perfect. And one of the things the Legacy Society specializes in is making things happen the way our members want them to happen. So you want a reference library?
Here it
Gotcha.
comes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So thank you for that, and thank you again for inviting us into your home. Thank you for the interview.
Now that you know where we live, the door's always open.
And thank you for your shared vision.
Yes.
Well, our vision overlaps with your mission, and so we're happy to cheer you on.
And help in any way we can. And I was talking to Tory also. He was discussing, I guess, with you, some personal stories about Sue and Charlie that could be added to the information that you have available, that you make available to other people too. And since I met them first and spent so much time with them, I'm glad to write that up. He wasn't really sure. He was going to research the Du Bois area history and that sort of thing, and I said, they've already got that. And so I think it would be great to have personal stories about things that we have done together, Sue and Charlie and we, because we used to spend quite a bit of time over there, and Sue was just such a pistol. Oh my goodness, we don't know any women like that, do we?
Kindred spirit.
At one point this was just sad, but it was so her, is that she developed breast cancer, and she went in to have a mastectomy, and the doctor said, well, you realize this is going to be the end of your tennis, because she was always beating out all these young people, young women especially, around the valley at tennis games, and she goes, oh, pshaw, please, are you just rooting for the others? And of course she went on to continue to play tennis, and she could just whop them. And then she hiked quite a bit. She would be climbing Whiskey and Arrow and over here in the Absarokas all the time. And the doctor's same thing. You're not going to have near the stamina that you used to have. And she goes, oh, pshaw, I'm fine. And she did. She just went out, If you don't do it, that's use it or lose it, right? And so just wonderful stories about her attitude. She had a wonderful ethic
Can-do
about
attitude.
life. Can-do attitude. Yep. She was just so much fun. And at one point I was the Wildlife National Committee chair for Sierra Club. And so I'd have to go to the national board meetings in San Francisco, and they were coming back from Ojai at that point, and I keep in touch with them, and they said, would you come and drive us home, because Charlie's just not up to it anymore. Oh, he developed, I think, either Alzheimer's or dementia, and he would wander off when they'd stop for gas. Where's Charlie? Yeah. And so I said, sure. So I got down to Ojai, and we spent time, a few days coming back. Right? We didn't do a major fast road trip. We said, we want to see things along the way. And they'd show me these different places that they stopped. And we just had a blast. And of course, chat. And Charlie was always telling these stories over and over again. And it was so funny. We would laugh. And she'd say, Charlie, get on with it, will you?
Sue was a wonderful person, and she really did not know the meaning of no. She just did not know it. And the story I got was when she was in her late 70s or maybe even into her 80 or young 80s, she quit climbing the Grand Teton because Charlie worried about her so much. And so she said, okay, I'll quit climbing that mountain. And as well as
but only because of that.
Whipping everybody at
she
at
could have
first.
climbed it.
But she was a lady in every sense of the word. When I think of Sue, I think of Queen Elizabeth, somebody that was very calm and very much a gentle lady. And but she was also, she knew her mind, and she was not afraid in a nice way to set somebody straight if they did something that she did not approve of. But she was just a wonderful, wonderful person.
You would have loved her.
We were blessed to have known Sue and Charlie.
Yeah, we certainly were.
And we look forward to those personal stories that are just as important as the factual timeline
Absolutely,
history.
they are.
Yeah, that keeps them
I'll try
alive.
to dig them out of my brain. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, we look forward to working with you guys on the Beck Center, on the library, on these personal stories. And we look forward to preserving your wishes, your ethics, and your land in many years to come. So thank
Well,
you.
thank you.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
The Legacy Library. I love the alliteration.
Yes,
I like
it's
that.
perfect. This has been Tory Taylor, Meredith Taylor, Sarah Bridge, and Garrett Girona with the National Bighorn Sheep Center Legacy Society. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to more in the future.